Episode 320.
Strategy? What strategy?
Blue River was a bit lost.
A guide for setting dungeon records.
Yi Shu answered with ease. The template for this guide came from Concealed Light. After days of continuous effort, he had finally produced a proper step-by-step guide for breaking dungeon records. Yi Shu had studied it thoroughly and found no flaws. With this guide in hand, any properly equipped team could throw their hat in the ring for the dungeon record. After that, it's all down to execution. However, Concealed Light's guides were ultimately compiled and summarized from the strategies and videos of those who came before. All he did was write a more detailed, more precise guide, one so precise it laid out every single step. This allowed players aiming for records to skip the trial and error research phase. Just follow the steps. No matter how you look at it, Concealed Light's guide never really broke free from the old framework. It's detailed, sure, but it's not new. The tactics he wrote about in his guide were things veteran players like Blue River once knew by heart. They're just rusty now, from lack of practice. Concealed Light's guide could save them a huge amount of time they'd otherwise spend relearning and adapting, letting them jump straight into practicing a solid, effective strategy. However, the guide Yi Shu was introducing to Blue River wasn't Concealed Light's original version. It was a revised edition, one Yi Shu had personally tweaked based on Concealed Light's template. These revisions were genuine innovations, fresh strategies for the One-Line Valley that hadn't been seen in years. Like the new strategy Yi Shu designed for the Burial Dungeon run. A new strategy like this, lacking experience and practice, is just a theory from Concealed Light. You can't just think it up in your head. One wrong assumption, and he'd be off on the wrong foot, stumbling from one mistake to the next.
A guide for setting dungeon records?
But Blue River still had his doubts.
That's right. As long as you can pull it off, this strategy will guarantee you the top spot on the dungeon leaderboard.
Yi Shu answered with absolute confidence. He wasn't like Concealed Light. His confidence was always grounded in solid reasoning, never just wishful thinking.
Oh, then I'll learn a thing or two.
You didn't think this was free, did you, kid?
Blue River froze for a moment. In that instant, he understood. So Lord Grimm had changed professions. Given the current situation, Lord Grimm's mercenary business is probably going to be a tough sell. While the major guilds are well aware of Lord Grimm's power, hiring him to set records now backfires. He's simply too strong, too famous. He overshadows the guilds themselves. If Lord Grimm's name is on the record, that's all the players will see. The guild's name? They'll just filter it out. Hiring Lord Grimm to set records was no longer viable, yet the guilds still desperately needed those records. With Lord Grimm looming over them like an impassable mountain, the 7 guilds had no choice but to join forces and hunt him down. Although Blue River Guild wasn't involved, they had spies of varying levels in all the major guilds, so Blue River was perfectly aware of everything that had happened these past few days. He was glad he hadn't waded into that mess. Lord Grimm really gave those 7 guilds a proper thrashing. But Blue River knew full well that the great god wouldn't be having an easy time of it either. No matter how strong he was still just one man. He had to stay on high alert every second, constantly dancing with the major guilds. This fight was likely to leave both sides battered and bruised. In Blue River's view, no matter how many guild players the great god killed, it wouldn't solve the situation. The major guilds would never back down. The key to ending this fight over dungeon records lies in the dungeon records themselves. If the god can keep steamrolling through all the dungeon records while playing the guilds against each other, they'll have no choice but to cave in. It's entirely possible they'd pay you to stop breaking records. Lord Grimm crushing dungeon records, no problem, and now it seems dealing with the guilds is no problem for him either. So, violently conquering all the major guilds might sound impossible, but it's not entirely out of the question. At least Blue River, who knew Lord Grimm's true identity, thought so. As a guild leader, he had a much clearer picture of the various guilds' progress in pioneering new territories. Everyone was about to enter the level 34 dungeon, Blazing Forest. It would soon become the focus of their efforts. The final dungeon record for One-Line Canyon will be set tonight, as its elite players are about to hit level 34. Tonight's records will be the guild's absolute best, but Lord Grimm, still shy of level 33, will likely level up soon after and swiftly erase their hard-won achievements. Or at his current level, he could set a record right in the eye of the storm, one so daunting it would make others hesitate to even try. Of course, Blue River hadn't given up on the record entirely. What he'd given up on was the idea of competing with the top players. If he could set a record that stood head and shoulders above the rest, he'd go negotiate with the great god, promising not to touch their record. In other words, Blue River is already prepared to take the step of buying your promise not to break the record. But first, he had to make sure Blue Brook Guild secured the record. And right before this fierce competition kicked off, the great god had sought him out, trying to sell him some kind of strategy guide. Blue River understood instantly. As expected of a top-tier player, his logic was crystal clear. He knew full well that the dungeon record was the best way to resolve the current conflict. But he didn't do as Blue River imagined, snatching the record at the height of the storm to violently suppress the guild's resistance. Instead, he chose a roundabout approach, preparing to use others' hands to secure the dungeon record. When the dungeon record isn't under Lord Grimm's control, the guild's aggro towards him naturally disappears. Isn't that just common sense? But while Lord Grimm could afford to lose the records, he couldn't afford to lose the materials they earned. That's why the god started selling strategies.
Oh, brilliant. Truly brilliant.
Blue River couldn't help but admire the move in his heart. He had effortlessly diffused the aggro from the major guilds, yet still profited from the record. This masterstroke of simultaneously neutralizing and attacking was truly brilliant. By now, Blue River had completely grasped the master's intention, and he knew the master had no need to hide it. After all, being able to secure the dungeon record was something the guilds would be begging for.